The wind carried no news but dust that morning, and Jonas Cutter knew, before he saw it, that something had gone wrong on the trail. The sky had that kind of pale, bleached color that looked like it had been worn down by the sun for too many seasons. It was spring in the high desert country beyond Whistler's Ridge, though spring here was little more than a softer wind and fewer rattles in the grass. The land stretched outward in tired swells, the sagebrush shaking like it remembered rain. Dust rolled low across the earth, thick as old regret, and Jonas Cutter rode straight into it with his head bowed beneath the brim of his battered hat. Daisy, his mare, moved slow, the way all old things do when they've earned the right not to rush. Her hooves beat a rhythm steady and low, 4 quiet taps on dry earth that carried no urgency. Jonas didn't press her. He hadn't pressed much of anything in years. A crow passed overhead, silent, and that meant something. The trail that curved up from Dry River Bend had once been busy, stagecoaches, wagons, traders passing through on their way to the settlements farther west. But not anymore. The post office in Dry Cedar Bluff had closed 2 winters ago, and after that, fewer and fewer folks had reason to pass this way. Jonas only took the trail now when he was looking for solitude, sharp enough to cut through the ache that lived behind his ribs. That morning, it wasn't solitude that met him. Daisy stopped without prompting. Her ears flicked back, nostrils flared. Jonas slid from the saddle like he'd done 100 times before, 1 foot then the other, boots meeting the gravel with a quiet crunch. His eyes narrowed as he looked ahead. What remained of the wagon wasn't much. Splintered wood strewn across the low ravine, canvas half burned and fluttering like ghost skin in the wind. The wheels had been shattered, spokes scattered like broken ribs. He moved slowly, deliberately, past a scorched trunk and the remains of a campfire that hadn't burned clean. The smell hit him next. Not just smoke and char, but something deeper, something final. Bodies. Not many. 4, maybe 5. He didn't count. They were laid out in that ugly way death brings, arms askew, mouths open like they'd tried to scream something that the world refused to hear. He didn't move to cover them. Not yet. Some still had faces. Some had none. Mercy could wait its turn. Near the remains of the front axle he saw a bonnet. Pink, torn, too small. A child's hand still curled beneath it. Jonas removed his hat, but he didn't speak. No prayer would undo what was already done. The wind gusted once and carried ash into the folds of his coat. He turned slightly, gaze landing on a half-collapsed wheel leaning against a boulder. Something behind it moved. Not quick, just a flutter. He stilled. A breath. No more than that. But he heard it. He stepped forward, boots crunching through broken china and blackened earth until he came around the wheel. There, beneath a fur-lined cloak singed at the hem, lay a woman. Not a girl. Not one of the bonnet-clad Sunday travelers. A woman, grown and proud, even in ruin. Her face was streaked with soot and blood, her hair wild with ash and tangled like storm grass. Her eyes were closed, but her lips trembled slightly. Her hand twitched, bare, raw-knuckled, dirt embedded in the nail beds. He knelt beside her. Not to speak, but to listen. Closer now, he could feel the warmth rising from her in shallow bursts. She was breathing, barely. He hovered his hand near her mouth to be sure. There it was, fragile as a moth's wing. Jonas didn't hesitate. He slipped his arms beneath her, surprised by how little weight she carried, like grief had already done half the work of hollowing her out. Her head tipped against his shoulder. He didn't speak. The world had said enough already. Daisy did not resist when he lifted her again. She only snorted softly, her breath catching the scent of blood. The sun hung low now, dragging shadows across the land like torn cloth. Jonas turned westward without a backward glance. The ride was silent, slow, and sacred. His cabin stood tucked against the shoulder of a shallow hill, veiled in cottonwoods that rustled like an old man muttering his dreams. The roof had held through 3 winters. The hearth still burned hot. Jonas had built every part of it himself after Mary passed, each nail a moment of breath, each beam a cry he didn't let out. He carried the woman inside and laid her on the cot near the fire. The flames had begun to sink low, throwing orange against the walls. He set water to boil, stripped her of the outer layers of charred fabric, careful not to touch skin that might already be broken. Her left arm was swollen at the wrist, the glove on her right hand still intact. Pearl buttons shining faintly in the glow. He cleaned what he could, ran warm cloth over the gash near her collarbone, wrapped her fingers in oil-soaked linen. Her lips were split. Blood had crusted there, dark and brittle. The wind howled once outside, shaking the window frame. Jonas glanced toward the door, but didn't move. He sat beside her, legs stretched out, arms crossed. His eyes never left her chest, not for want, but for certainty. To be sure it rose. To be sure it still defied the stillness around it. Night came in full. The stars, those cold bastards, blinked open one by one. Somewhere far off, a coyote called out, but no one answered. Crickets took up the slack in the silence. He didn't sleep. Hadn't in years. Not really. The fire hissed. The cabin settled. When the morning came, it did so slow, spilling gold through the cracks in the wall, brushing dust motes into the air like grace. Jonas stood, stretched the ache from his bones, and stepped outside. He chopped wood that morning, but not for heat, for motion. The woman hadn't stirred. Not yet. He returned at mid-morning, set a damp cloth on her forehead, and replaced the bandage on her wrist. Her breath remained steady, but far off, like she was floating somewhere not here, somewhere she hadn't yet decided to return from. That night, he spoke aloud. Not to her, not even to himself, really, just into the space between. "You've lived through worse, I reckon," he said. "Live through this." She didn't stir, but the wind outside quieted, like it was listening. Jonas boiled beans for supper, ate alone, as usual, lit a second lamp near her cot and turned it low. He placed her glove on the windowsill, unsure why. He didn't look at her mouth again. He remembered what Mary had looked like the day she stopped breathing. Open-mouthed, quiet, like she'd meant to say goodbye and forgot the words. He didn't want to see that look twice. The next morning, something changed. She shifted just slightly. A wince, a curl of the fingers. He heard it before he saw it. A breath caught in the throat. Then a quiet moan, one that barely pushed through her cracked lips. Jonas leaned forward, waiting, not moving. Her eyes fluttered once, then again, then open. She blinked slowly, the ceiling above her unfamiliar. She tried to speak. "Don't try," he said, voice low, worn smooth like old river stones. "You're safe." Her eyes moved to him, confused. Searching. She took the cup he offered, drank slowly with both hands, as though it might vanish if she wasn't careful. Afterward, she just looked at him, waiting. He adjusted the blanket, stood back, then sat near the stove again. "You got a name?" he asked, sometime after the silence got too loud. She looked down at her wrist, at the glove that wasn't there. A long pause, then softly, "I don't remember." He knew that was a lie. He could feel it in the air between them. But he didn't push. "Then I guess we'll wait till you do." He returned to the fire, stoked it gently. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere out on the plain, a crow lifted into the sky, its wings carving through the dawn, like it was writing something the earth might one day understand. And Jonas Cutter, who hadn't saved a damn thing in years, sat beside a stranger and waited to see if the world had anything left to give. "She may die before morning," he told the fire softly. "But she won't die alone." Before the sun rose, Jonas knew the woman was alive, because he heard her weep without sound. There are certain sounds a man forgets over time: train whistles swallowed by distance, hymnals echoing from church rafters now collapsed. A child's laugh turned into memory, but not that one. That quiet, hollow weep of someone who doesn't want to be heard. Jonas Cutter had heard it only once before, on the night Mary learned her fever would never break. And now, in the soft hours before sunrise, with the fire dwindling to embers and the smell of oil lamp smoke curling low, he heard it again. It came faint from the cot behind him. No gasping, no sobs, just a steady exhale of sorrow trying not to exist. He didn't turn around, didn't speak. Some griefs weren't meant to be touched. He stood slowly, joints creaking like the floorboards, and moved to pour water into the kettle. The light outside hadn't come yet, just that steel blue sliver at the edge of the horizon. The kind of light that made promises it didn't always keep. Behind him, the weeping stopped, replaced by breath, shallow but steadier. Jonas set the kettle on the stove, the hiss of flame catching beneath it sounding louder than it should have. He let it boil, slowly, while the air thickened with silence and something else. Not tension, not peace. Just the feeling of a room not used to holding two lives at once. When she stirred next, it was near morning proper, the sky now pink and thin, the light falling over the floor like a slow blessing. She shifted beneath the blanket, her hand rising shakily to her temple, then resting again near her chest. Jonas turned from the stove, his expression unreadable but softer now. Her lips parted. She tried to speak again, but the sound caught in her throat. He stepped forward, crouched beside the cot, and placed the tin cup into her hands. Warm water. Her fingers trembled around it. "Easy," he said. She sipped carefully, like she feared she might spill her memory with the water. When she finished, she looked at him full for the first time. Her eyes weren't bright. They were storm-dark, shadowed with something old. Not fear exactly, not trust either. She scanned the cabin, slowly, methodically, the single chair, the rifle on the wall, the fraying curtains, the portrait in the wooden frame. Her gaze lingered there, then fell away. "Where am I?" she rasped. "My place," Jonas said simply. "You were the only one left." She froze. Her mouth twitched as if to ask more, but stopped. A flicker passed over her face, the kind that doesn't belong to the present. Jonas sat back on his heels, waiting. "Your wagon," he said. "It was north of the ridge. Nothing left but you." She blinked hard, once, then turned her head away. The blanket shifted slightly with the motion, revealing the singed edge of her sleeve and the faint bruising beneath her collarbone. He didn't stare, just stood again and returned to the stove. The smell of boiling coffee soon filled the air. He poured a cup and brought it to her without a word. She took it, fingers brushing his, though neither acknowledged it. She started, then paused. "Thank you." He nodded once, sat across the room again. The fire cracked. Later, when the light had fully bloomed across the prairie, she spoke again. "You asked me for my name," she said. Jonas looked over, waited. She glanced down at the glove on her right hand, the one that had never been removed. Her left remained bare, bruised, calloused now. She studied both, like they might speak for her. "My name? I don't remember." Jonas watched her jaw tighten ever so slightly. That was the lie. He knew it, but he didn't say so. "Then we'll wait," he replied. "Till you do." She nodded, once. Looked toward the window. The breeze moved the curtain gently, letting in sunlight that caught the dust in a golden shimmer. Her eyes followed it. "I just needed to see the sky," she whispered. "To know the world still turns." Jonas followed her gaze. Outside, the prairie rolled soft and slow, the grass bending like it remembered the weight of footsteps that hadn't come in a while. "It does," he said, "whether we ask it to or not." That evening, she ate again, this time a spoonful more. Potato broth, thickened with wild onion. Jonas had gone into the hills that morning to gather roots, left her sleeping, returned to find her sitting up back against the wall. She didn't ask what he'd done while gone. He didn't offer. After supper, she watched the fire, her hands curled together in her lap. Still that glove on her right, still the guardedness in her posture. But something shifted as the night deepened. Jonas reached into a drawer and pulled out a wooden comb. He set it near her gently, then returned to his chair. She stared at it. Then her fingers reached for it, slow and uncertain. She ran it once through her hair, matted, tangled still with soot in places. The comb caught. She didn't wince. "You built this place yourself?" she asked, not looking at him. "Yes." "After someone?" "Yes." "Wife." He nodded. Her hand stilled. "I'm sorry. I reckon she's past needing apologies." They sat like that, with just the fire and the wind outside for company. The next morning brought sun warm enough to melt the chill from the floorboards. Jonas was already outside when she stood for the first time. She took the blanket with her, draped around her like a shawl, walked slow to the door, and opened it. The light made her flinch, but she stepped forward anyway. Jonas saw her from the corral. He didn't call out. She looked across the prairie, her bare feet pressing into the packed dirt. The sky above was clear, pale, unending. Jonas walked up beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. "You'll catch cold," he said, though not with warning. "I needed air," she said, "to breathe without remembering fire." They stood quiet a while. Her hair lifted in the breeze, brushed against her cheek like a lullaby someone had almost forgotten. "You're not from here," he said. "No." "Where?" "Then." "A long way off." She said no more, but her voice changed when she added, "I was on my way to a place I didn't want to go." Jonas nodded. "That wagon wasn't going to take you anywhere new, was it?" She turned her head toward him, finally, fully. "You think I'm running?" "Aren't we all?" he asked. She looked away again. Her eyes traced the horizon like it might name her if she stared long enough. "I'm not running any more," Jonas added. She said nothing to that. Just wrapped the blanket tighter. He didn't ask what haunted her. He didn't need to. It was there in the way her body leaned forward slightly, as though bracing for a blow that never came. Back inside, she helped him chop herbs for supper. Her hands were clumsy at first, bruised knuckles, unsteady grip, but she kept at it. "Used to cook?" he asked. "I was taught." "Fancy?" "Too fancy," she said with a breath that almost became a laugh. She stirred the broth slowly. He watched her more than the fire. That night, she traced the edge of the tin cup as he read from a book without saying the words aloud. She didn't ask what the book was. It didn't matter. Before she went to the side room, the smaller cot now made carefully, she paused near the door. "You don't ask many questions." "I don't believe in earning trust with noise." She tilted her head. Her eyes searched his. "Thank you, Jonas." He looked at her. Really looked. There was something both shattered and noble in her face. A woman who had survived not just blood, but silence. Not just distance, but forgetting. "Good night, ma'am," he said softly. She turned then, disappearing into the room. He watched the door for a long while after. Outside, the moon rose full and pale, casting light through the high branches of the cottonwoods. The prairie held still, as if honoring a quiet pact between two souls who had not yet spoken their full truths. And in the dark, behind a wall thin as breath, a woman with no name dreamed of salt air and hallways echoing with names she no longer claimed. She did not dread the morning, and in that moment, with the wind tugging her hair and a dead wagon behind her, she wanted to believe him. It rained the first night she stood without trembling, and Jonas noticed she didn't flinch when thunder broke. It had come without warning, that rain, no scent on the wind, no bruised clouds stacking across the sky the way they usually did. Just one distant roll of thunder, then a spill of water from the heavens, like something broke loose up there, and it couldn't hold any longer. Jonas stood under the awning, watching the drops slap down in silver streaks. He didn't move to call her in from the edge of the porch. She stood there in silence, her bare feet planted on the planks, blanket tight around her shoulders, eyes tilted skyward. Her face didn't twist at the sound of thunder. Her hands didn't rise to shield her from the rain. She let it soak her hair, her lashes, her collarbone, like she needed to be reminded what it felt like to be touched and not burned. He remembered Mary trembling once at a storm like this, back when her illness made her skin feel too thin for weather. And now here she was, this stranger with a name she wouldn't say, standing tall under a bruising sky like she meant to challenge the storm itself. After a while, she turned and stepped back inside, drops trailing from her hair to the floor, eyes shining, not with fear, but something steadier. Jonas didn't ask what she was thinking. He didn't ask anything. He handed her a towel. She took it, dried her face, and for the first time she smiled, just slightly, like her lips were testing the shape. There was strength in her then, not loud, but earned. 3 days passed like that, slow, wordless, not without purpose. The cabin held more than silence now. It held motion. She helped where she could, folded blankets, brushed ash from the corners. Her hands were still weak, but less so. The bruises were yellowing. Her voice returned in pieces. And though she still slept with one hand curled into a fist beneath her chin, the other now rested open on her chest. Jonas gave her space, but he watched, always. On the 5th morning, he came in with mud on his boots and a wrapped bundle slung under one arm. She looked up from the table, where she'd been trying to sew a patch onto one of the old curtains, thread crooked, hands unsteady. He didn't speak, just set the bundle down and stepped back. She unwrapped it slowly, her breath caught. A piano. Well, not quite. An upright, aged thing with scuffed keys and faded wood, but it stood proud, its weight undeniable even in its wear. She looked from it to him. He shrugged. "General store had it in back," he said. "Offered it for half what a saddle's worth. Said no one could make it sing." She walked to it, laid her fingers on the lid, traced the dust like it was an old friend, then lifted the cover. The keys were yellowed, but intact. She sat, stared at them. She didn't play. Not that night. Not the next, either. Jonas didn't push. Instead, he cooked. He read. He sanded a broken drawer and carved a new handle. And on the 7th night, just as dusk turned the windows violet, he heard it. Music. Soft, hesitant, like someone knocking on a door they weren't sure would open. A half melody, a handful of notes scattered like wildflowers, fragile and trembling, but whole in its attempt. He didn't interrupt. He leaned against the wall, near the stove, arms crossed, head bowed slightly. The notes filled the space between them, and when she finished, she didn't turn to him. She just sat there, hands resting on the keys, like they'd always belonged there. "Did you know music could feel like breath?" she asked. He answered without pause. "Only when it stops." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes shimmered. The next day passed in quiet ease. She made coffee. He cleaned out the barn. The air between them had changed. Still solemn, still respectful, but no longer cautious. something had been named, without names. That evening, he found her outside, walking toward the ridge. She looked back over her shoulder. "Will you come with me?" she asked. He did. They walked in rhythm, not speaking, boots pressing into the soft dirt path that wound between wild sage and low hills. The cottonwood tree at the top stood like a sentinel, branches spread wide, like arms too tired to fold. When they reached it, she stopped, turned to face the endless land that rolled outward, painted in lavender and rust by the sinking sun. "This land feels like it never ends," she said. "It don't," Jonas replied. "Not really." She tucked her hands into the pockets of her skirt, looked out a while longer. "How do you live with that?" "You don't," he said after a pause. "You let it live with you." She turned to him then, not startled, not uncertain, just quiet. "I've carried something too long," she said. "Not a thing I can touch, but a name, and I don't want to carry it anymore." He nodded. "You don't have to." She stepped closer. The breeze lifted strands of her hair. Her eyes searched his. "My name is Clara," she said. Jonas held her gaze. "I know," he said. She blinked. Once. Then again. "You knew. Not the name, but the weight. You had the look of someone who'd been called things she never asked for." Her breath caught slightly, but she steadied it. "I'm not ready to tell you the rest," she said. "Not yet. I ain't asking." They stood in silence then, but not the kind that begged for more, the kind that answered. When they returned to the cabin, the light inside was golden. He poured her tea. She drank it slow. Later she placed her glove on the table, just one. The right hand, bare now, rested beside her cup. Jonas said nothing, but he saw it. That night, as he lit the lamp beside the stove, he asked, "Walk with me again tomorrow?" She nodded. "I'd like that." She looked toward the piano then, fingers twitching slightly as though remembering. "You think it'll remember my hands?" she asked softly. "Already does," he said. And she smiled, not the tentative kind, but the sort that curled from somewhere deeper. The sky outside darkened, the prairie bathed in hush, and from somewhere far off, a lone coyote called into the night, not for fear, not for hunger, but for company. She turned to him, eyes the color of stormlight. "My name is Clara." The sky was too blue that morning, the kind of blue that made you think nothing bad could happen. It had the crispness of a new page. That sky, stretched wide above the hills like someone had washed the whole world clean overnight. The cottonwood leaves trembled in a soft breeze that smelled of warm dirt and lilac. Birds darted through the air with songs too carefree for memory. And Clara, for the first time since arriving, wore her hair unbound. Jonas noticed that first, though he didn't speak on it. She stood by the pump, sleeves rolled up, skirt dusted with flour from the morning's bread-making. The light caught in the loose strands of her braid, silver threads dancing like smoke. He leaned against the doorframe and watched her turn the pump handle with steady rhythm, water splashing into the tin bucket below. "Going to town," she said, not looking at him. Jonas straightened slowly. "You sure?" "I need thread," she replied, "and a bit of flour. I used more than I meant to." A pause. "And I need to try." He took a long breath, folded his arms. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I want to feel normal, just for a few hours." Her voice didn't waver. Her back didn't bend. He walked down the steps, wiped his hands on a cloth he kept tucked at his belt. The horses were already saddled. She'd done that too. "If anything troubles you," he said, quiet but firm, "you leave it and come back. Nothing in that town is worth more than your peace." She looked at him then, fully, with the kind of look that meant she understood the weight behind the words. "I'll be all right." Jonas nodded, though his jaw stayed set. He watched her ride out, slow at first, then finding her rhythm as she passed the fence line and followed the trail toward Whistler's Ridge. She did not look back. The general store sat where it always had, low and wide, with a roof that creaked when the wind got bold. The bell above the door gave its same old cough when pushed open. Inside, it smelled of saddle soap, grain dust, and peppermints in a glass jar by the till. Miners came in and out with boots too loud. Ranch wives with listless children made soft conversation by the bolts of calico. No one looked twice at her. That, she realized, was the fear she hadn't named, not being seen, but not being recognized. She moved slow through the aisles, eyes resting on everyday things: soap, buttons, dried apricots, a tin of hairpins like the one she used to wear tucked behind her ear. Her hands stopped there, hovering, and that's when she heard it. A voice. Refined, slightly too loud, brushed with the kind of accent that still curled its vowels like it feared getting its boots dirty. "My God, is that—" She turned. He was standing by the counter, hand frozen on a tobacco tin, eyes locked on hers. His clothes were travel-worn, but expensive, a cravat loose around his throat. His boots too clean for this part of the country. "Baroness," he said, soft now. "It is you." Her breath caught. Her fingers stiffened around the tin. "Clara," he corrected quickly, as if softening would fix the damage. "Clarisse d'Aubigny." The name hit the air like a stone thrown into a pond, quiet at first, but rippling. "I thought you were—" He swallowed. "Your uncle sent letters everywhere. After the wedding, after you disappeared, we thought you were—" "I am not that woman anymore." Her voice was flat, cold steel against the dusty warmth of the room. He stepped forward. "But what are you doing here? Dressed like a housemaid?" She looked at him then, not with fear, not with surprise, just the kind of tired resolve that comes from living too long in borrowed light. "I am no one," she said, "and I suggest you leave me be." The store had gone quiet. The ranch wife near the flour sack pretended not to hear. The shopkeeper coughed softly. The man stared, stunned. Not angry, just thrown. He nodded slowly. "They'll want to know you're alive." "I doubt it." "They'll send someone else." "Let them." She turned, walked out. The bell gave its little chime behind her. The bread she'd chosen was still on the counter. The thread remained in her fist. Jonas knew before she reached the gate. He stood near the barn, oiling the saddle he'd promised to mend for a neighbor. His eyes met hers as she rode in. Her gait was precise, shoulders drawn, jaw tight. He didn't ask. She dismounted, unsaddled the horse, moved around him like a shadow. Only once they were both inside, her hands braced on the table and his still at the stove, did she speak. "Someone recognized me." He turned slowly, waited. She didn't look at him, only stared into the hearth, where the morning coals still glowed. "What did they call you?" he asked, quiet. "Baroness." Her voice cracked, but just once. She inhaled, then turned to face him, her eyes fierce despite the shaking in her limbs. "My full name is Clarisse d'Aubigny, daughter of the late Lord Adrien d'Aubigny, heir to the line of Marseille." Jonas didn't blink. He simply let the words settle into the room. She went on. "I was meant to marry a man chosen by my uncle. I did not love him. He did not care. I was currency. That's all we are. In houses like mine. I ran." She paused, steadied her breath. "I bought passage west, took another name. That wagon. It was supposed to take me far enough that no one would call me that again." She stepped closer, the fire casting her shadow against the far wall. "I never meant to lie to you. You didn't. I never told you the truth. You were surviving," Jonas said. "That's not the same thing." She watched him then. Really watched, chest rising. Fingers curled around the edge of the table. You aren't surprised. I'm not the kind of man people lie to because they think I'd understand, he said. I'm the kind they lie to because they think I'd forgive them when they finally can't. The fire cracked softly. She took another step toward him. And do you? He looked at her, full of something vast and quiet and true. There ain't anything to forgive. She shook her head. Barely. You saw a woman you wanted to fix. I saw a woman who didn't need fixing, he said. Only room to stop running. Her eyes shimmered. She pressed a hand to her mouth. I don't know who I am without that name, but I also can't carry it anymore. You don't have to, she swallowed. Then who am I? He stepped forward now, slowly, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, gentle as dust settling on an old Bible. You're the woman who plays piano like it matters. Who burns bread but tries again. Who sleeps with one hand in a fist and the other in prayer. That's who you are. Her breath broke. She stepped into him, hands trembling. Do you think I could stay here? She whispered. Just as Clara. He didn't move away, didn't rush forward, just stood steady. You already have. They stood like that for a long moment, the shadows on the wall long and warm. That night, she didn't go to the side room. She paused by his bed, still uncertain. He didn't beckon, didn't move, just waited. I'm not asking for more than rest, she said. You don't owe me more. She slipped beneath the quilt, the cotton rough but clean. The bed was wide enough for both. They lay shoulder to shoulder, neither touching. The silence between them was not empty. When she drifted off, Jonas whispered, You're safe. And in the dark, she believed him. Jonas only nodded and said, Then let's see who else remembers, and what they think they'll do about it. He rode in from the east just past noon, dust at his back and silver on his belt. Jonas Cutter knew the sound of a man who didn't belong. The rhythm of the horse was wrong, not tired, not work-worn, not local. It was fast, sharp, carrying a rider too eager to arrive and too sure he had every right to. From the ridge above the cabin, Jonas paused with his hands resting against a cedar rail he'd spent the morning repairing. Clara stood beside him, shawl tight over her shoulders despite the heat, her eyes narrowed towards the horizon. The two of them had spent most of the day up here, speaking little, walking slow. It had become their place. The cottonwood overhead whispered softly in the wind, its long limbs shifting like it remembered things it wasn't ready to say. Then came the rider. He was a dark figure against the pale stretch of trail that led from Whistler's Ridge. The dust behind him curled like smoke from a dry fire. His hat sat too perfect on his head. His jacket, though travel-worn, gleamed with polish along the seams. Even the revolver on his hip shone as if freshly oiled. There was no doubt about it. He was a man used to being obeyed and never questioned. Clara didn't speak. Jonas straightened slowly, watched. The rider slowed as he approached the cabin, scanning the property, the barn, the pump, the stack of firewood neatly split. He dismounted with a smoothness that spoke of years in saddle. Though his boots struck the earth too clean, too deliberate. He looked like a man who hadn't known real dirt in a long while. Then his eyes rose and met theirs at the top of the ridge. He smiled, not friendly, practiced. He called up to them, voice carrying across the still air. Evelyn. Jonas felt her go still beside him. He didn't look at her. She didn't answer. The man tipped his hat with 2 fingers, a lazy sort of salute. Jonas Cutter, he said. Mighty fine place you've built here. Jonas didn't move. What's your business? The man took his time, walked slowly toward the cabin, letting his hand rest on his belt just beside the gleaming revolver. My business is family, he said. Yours, mine. hers. Clara stepped forward now, not behind Jonas, not sheltered, but beside him. "She don't belong to anyone," Jonas said. The man tilted his head, smiling like a man who thinks he's already won. "You know, the Daubigny name reaches far. There are people back east still expecting her return. Important people. People who paid dearly to keep things quiet." Clara didn't flinch. "Then they must be desperate," she said. The man's eyes flicked to her. "They think you've been taken, or bewitched, or worse." "They were wrong," she said. "I'm just hiding." "No," she corrected herself. "I was hiding. I'm not anymore." The man took a slow step closer. Jonas didn't move, but the space around him seemed to narrow, tighten, not with threat, but with something heavier, conviction. "You're not coming for her," Jonas said. "Not now. Not ever." The man stopped. His smile didn't fade, but his eyes sharpened. "You going to stop me?" Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. There was no flare of anger, no raised voice, just the simple fact of his presence, as fixed and unmoving as the cottonwood behind them. He had nothing to threaten, nothing to prove. That was the danger of men like him. They had already lost too much to fear losing again. The man looked again to Clara. His tone softened, but not kindly. "You're wasting your title, your legacy." "I'm living," she said. "That's more than I ever did under that name." He didn't reply. For a long breath, all three stood still. The wind shifted slightly, pushing the scent of sage uphill. Then the man stepped back, glanced once more at the cabin, at Jonas. "You'll hear from us again," he said. "Then we'll be here," Jonas replied. The man mounted with care, not in haste, but with the kind of movement that expected no one would challenge him. He turned the horse, tipped his hat once more, and rode back the way he came. Clara watched him go, not with fear, but with something else. Release. They stayed on the ridge long after he disappeared into the haze. Evening crept over the land in silence. When they returned to the cabin, she didn't speak right away. She lit the lantern, set water to boil, moved through the space like it was hers. Jonas sat near the hearth, one boot crossed over the other, his eyes following her without intrusion. Finally, she reached for the small chest she'd tucked under the bed. He knew what it was before she opened it. She withdrew a folded piece of linen and unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a gold ring set with a pale blue stone. It caught the light and held it, like it remembered who it once belonged to. She turned to him. "I need to do something." He rose without asking. They walked together to the cottonwood. The soil was soft there, damp from the rain 2 nights before. Clara knelt, dug with her hands. Jonas watched, still and steady. She placed the ring in the earth, folded it in with care, then smoothed the dirt over it like she was covering a memory with grace instead of shame. She stood, looked at him, her face open, tired but calm. "That part of me is buried now," she said. "I don't want it back." He didn't speak, just reached for her hand. They walked back to the cabin, fingers loosely linked, the silence between them not of avoidance, but of peace. The moon had begun to rise behind the hills. The old windmill creaked softly in the distance. Back inside, she moved to the piano, laid her hand on the keys, but didn't play. Jonas poured 2 cups of tea. She sipped hers with both hands wrapped around the tin, her eyes following the flicker of the lantern light. Neither of them spoke about the man. Neither needed to. And when she finally looked toward the window, the glass shimmered with starlight. Clara stood long after he'd gone, one hand clenched around a gold ring she hadn't worn in years. "It's time," she whispered. "Help me bury this." The cottonwood tree was older than both of them. and had kept more secrets than either cared to count. It stood with its wide arms outstretched over the ridge, just beyond the cabin, just close enough to see the prairie fall away into forever. The roots of that old tree pushed deep into the hill, like it was clinging to something buried long ago. Maybe a truth, maybe a prayer, maybe just the weight of everything time didn't forget. Jonas had carved a bench there the previous summer, before he knew Clara, back when the silence he lived in was clean, but lonely. He used to sit beneath the tree with a pipe and a book he never read, letting the wind tell him what it remembered. Now he stood with her beside it, watching her smooth the last bit of soil over the spot where she'd buried her past the night before. The morning was quiet, still. One of those silver mornings that doesn't belong to any season in particular, just to the space between breath and decision. The air smelled of pine smoke and distant rain, and the sky was soft as wool. Clara's hands were bare now, no gloves, no rings, just dirt under the nails, and a kind of peace in her knuckles. Jonas leaned on the shovel, arms crossed atop the handle, watching her from a step back. She didn't rush. She never did. When she finished, she straightened and stepped back. Looked down at the mound like it might speak if given time. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. They walked down together without speaking, down the slope to the cabin where the fire was already burning low and the coffee had been left warming on the stove. The table had 2 cups, as it had for weeks now, and the place by the window had a shawl folded neatly over the back of the chair. Hers. Breakfast passed with few words, as most of their meals did, but there was nothing hollow in the silence. Jonas noticed how her eyes lingered on the details of the room now, not out of fear, not for escape, but as someone who had decided to stay. After the meal, he went to the barn to patch a saddle strap. She stayed behind, humming softly as she gathered the dishes. It wasn't the song she had played on the piano the night before, but it was close, familiar enough that Jonas could hear it in his mind as he worked the leather. By late afternoon, they returned to the ridge again. Clara carried a small tin box filled with dried lavender and rose petals she had found tucked away in the bottom of the chest, wrapped in linen and almost forgotten. She scattered the petals gently over the grave she had made for her former life. Jonas watched her, standing just to the side, letting the wind move between them. "You ever going to market?" she asked, her voice quiet. He looked at the stone beside it, round and smooth and uncarved. "Thought about it," he said. "But sometimes things don't need telling. Sometimes the truth just lives there, quiet as anything." She smiled, but it wasn't sad. "You always did understand silence," she said, "and you always filled it with music." The clouds above them were starting to gather, streaking the sky with soft gray and bruised purple. The wind shifted, tugging at the hem of her dress. She didn't flinch. They stayed until the first drops began to fall, light and uncertain. Back in the cabin, she lit the oil lamp while he pulled off his boots and set them by the door. The piano waited quietly near the hearth, its keys dusty again. She wiped them with the hem of her sleeve, then sat down and played a hymn neither of them had heard in years, slow and steady, not for God, but for memory. When the music faded, Jonas spoke. "I never thought I'd want more than quiet again," he said. "But you, Clara, you didn't save me with noise. You saved me by staying." She turned on the bench to face him. "Elijah," she whispered. He raised his head slowly, startled by the sound of his full name on her lips. "Marry me." She said it without ceremony, without trembling. He looked at her, not with surprise, but with something deeper, something settled. "I'd marry you 1,000 times," he said, "in 1,000 lifetimes." She stepped toward him, bare feet on the old wood floor, and placed her hand in his. They kissed, not like a first kiss, Not like a storybook, but like two people who had waited long enough. A slow, certain kiss beneath a roof they both had mended. They were married a week later, beneath the cottonwood tree. No preacher, no witnesses but the wind and the birds and the prairie itself. She wore a dress she'd sewn from muslin patched with scraps. He wore a clean shirt and his father's boots. They said no vows. They didn't need to. Every quiet act between them had already spoken what mattered. That evening, they sat on the porch, fingers laced, watching the sun melt into the earth. "You think the past will ever come back?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "But if it does, it won't find us waiting." She nodded. "No," she said. "It'll find us living." The wind shifted again, warm and full, and from the hill behind the cabin, the cottonwood rustled softly, its leaves whispering like a promise kept. Clara stood on the porch wrapped in his coat, staring up at the stars. "I used to think the sky was too big," she said, "that I'd get lost in it." He came to stand beside her. "And now," she turned to him and smiled, "now I think I found someone to hold it with." And so, the land remembers, not through loud voices or carved stones, but in the hush between wind gusts and the slow sway of the cottonwood branches when no one is watching. In the way dusk settles gentle on a cabin's roof, where once there was only grief, and in the soft, persistent sound of a woman's hands brushing flour from a counter, as if dusting history clean. Because some stories don't end with applause, only with a kind of earned silence, the sort that settles behind the ribs and stays there. It's in the lone glove left folded on a windowsill, its partner buried under prairie earth, in the worn handle of a piano bench carved with calloused hands, in the scent of bread that rises even when the heart doubts it will, and in the rhythm of two boots side by side on a porch that overlooks a life reclaimed. The crow that once flew over burnt wagons now circles in wide arcs overhead, not in mourning, but in memory, and beneath it, somewhere far from maps and titles, a woman named herself anew. The horses know too, by the steadiness in the reins, the absence of urgency in every step home, and the way she doesn't flinch when the thunder rolls across the hills. The truth of who she was didn't need a ledger or a courtroom, or even forgiveness. It just needed one man who didn't ask questions he didn't have to, a man who could hold a silence without fear. Honor, you see, can be buried, can be twisted, forgotten, bought and sold, but it don't disappear. Not when it's tied to something real, something that plants wildflowers in scorched soil and refuses to call them weeds. Sometimes justice comes late, dragging its feet across the desert, with a dry throat and a weathered face. But when it finally arrives, it brings peace with it, not the kind that makes noise, but the kind that lingers like the scent of cedar smoke on old wool. In that quiet, there is redemption, not flashy, not quick, but slow burning like lamp oil, steady as a man's word. And forgiveness, that elusive thing, doesn't always come in apologies or grand confessions. Sometimes it's in the way he says her name without asking for the one she left behind, or in the simple fact that the door to the cabin never locked. The town may never know who she really was, but the earth does. It remembers every boot print, every note played late at night, every thread sewn into curtains that made a house a home. There's a lesson in that, perhaps, not one taught in schoolhouses or preached in chapels, but one felt in the bones, that the truth don't need a crowd, only a keeper, and love, when it comes late, is still right on time. If you've ever held your breath at twilight, waiting for the wind to speak, or stood beside someone who didn't ask you to change, only to stay, then maybe you understand already. If you've ever felt small under a sky too wide and found someone who didn't ask you to be less, only real, then you know what it means to be saved without rescue. Some call it grace. Some call it mercy. Out here, we just call it staying. So if this story stirred something quiet in you, some long-lost belief in honor, in the slow unfolding of trust, in the power of second chances not shouted but whispered, then leave a sign for those who still look for those things. Leave a mark in the dust. Say you were here. And if your heart can still hold room for a story told by oil lamplight, where justice may limp but never quits, where the forgotten woman saves a generation of kindness by daring to believe in her own voice again, then come sit with us by the fire next time. This channel is for you, the listener who waits for the kind of ending that don't fix everything, but leaves you with a peace as wide as the prairie sky. Subscribe if you still believe. Follow if you still carry quiet hope. And remember, sometimes the story that saves you isn't the loudest one, just the truest.